Back in 1982, Stephen Flacco was a part of Penn's Miracle on 33rd Street win over Harvard. But on January 3rd, 1971, a different football game took place on a different 33rd Street. In Baltimore's Memorial Stadium, the Colts were playing host to the Oakland Raiders in the first ever conference championship game in NFL history. A decade prior had marked the beginning of the truest threat to the NFL's total sports domination in its history. The American Football League, a 10-team setup, began in 1960 that put enough of a scare into the hearts of the senior league's owners that just 6 years later, the two rivals agreed on a plan for a merger to take place 4 years later, beginning with the 1970 season. During the intervening 4-year period, the leagues continued to have their own individual championships, but agreed to a final game played at the end of the season between each league's champion, referred to officially as the AFL-NFL World Championship Game. However, even in its first year of existence, the media and fans colloquially referred to this ultimate end-of-year matchup as the Super Bowl, and the name stuck through all 4 of the AFL-NFL World Championship games. While the NFL claimed the first 2 thanks to the Green Bay Packers, the AFL proved it was worthy of the upcoming merger when the Baltimore Colts were embarrassed by Joe Namath's New York Jets in Super Bowl III.
Following the end of the 1969 season, the merger was completed, and the newly formed NFL was composed of 26 teams. But there was a sticking point. 10 of those teams played in the AFL and 16 in the NFL. With the former independent leagues now forming 2 conferences under a larger umbrella, much like the partnership of the American and National Leagues in Major League Baseball, it was necessary to balance out the numbers. And so it was that 3 NFL teams joined the newly minted American Football Conference: the Cleveland Browns, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Baltimore Colts. That fact, coupled with an 11-2-1 record, meant that when the Colts made it to the conference championship weekend, they were in the privileged position of getting to host the first ever conference championship game in league history. With their famously taciturn quarterback Johnny Unitas back from injury and under center, Baltimore marched to a 27-17 win over Oakland to punch their ticket to Super Bowl V. Unitas held court for the press in the locker room afterwards, where he spoke softly and called the experience just another game. And for a 3-time MVP and soon-to-be 3-time NFL champion, maybe that attitude was correct. But as the city would learn in the subsequent decades, this moment of glory had been far from just another game. The Super Bowl, which Baltimore did win over the Dallas Cowboys, was played at a predetermined neutral site, as it has always been and would continue to be. For the remainder of their history in Baltimore, the Colts made only 4 more playoff trips, and their only home games were back-to-back divisional round losses in 75 and 76. Baltimore would not host an AFC championship for more than 50 years after this, by which time Memorial Stadium on 33rd had long been bulldozed and replaced by its downtown counterpart, M&T Bank Stadium. The bank had hosted a handful of playoff games to this point. On their way to Super Bowl 35, the Ravens at least got to host the Broncos in the wild card round before 3 straight games on the road. And then twice in the mid-aughts, they were one and dones after losing at home both times in 04 and 06.
All this is to say that it was an unusual position for Baltimore to be hosting what was at least to their fan base a wildly important playoff game. The team and city weren't exactly used to this. The Johnny Unitas era was so far back that his average of 2,339 passing yards per season, which would be 2,673 if extrapolated for a full 16 games, was enough for him to be considered a first-ballot Hall of Famer, whereas Joe, who had averaged more than 3,500 in his first 5 years as a starter, was still some kind of ink blot test for football fans who couldn't even agree whether the team that he was taking to a 5th postseason should re-sign him. The 1970 AFC Championship was an artifact from a different football world, but that team situation had some parallels with the 2012 Ravens. One team was led by a quarterback described as being as emotional as a doorstop, while one team's QB had his dad in the papers calling him exactly as dull as he was portrayed to be. Both teams were looking to exact some measure of revenge this year for a recent devastating playoff loss. And there was one final thing linking that January 1971 matchup and the one that would kick off on January 6th, 2012, some 41 years later. There would be a Baltimore team taking the field, and there would be a Colts team taking the field. They just weren't the same team this time.
A little less than a year before Joe Flacco would be born, Mayflower moving trucks arrived at the Baltimore Colts facility in the middle of the night on March 28, 1984. In a matter of hours, team owner Robert Irsay had packed up the team, the equipment, pretty much everything except the uniforms for the marching band, and headed west for Indianapolis. As would be the case with Art Modell in Cleveland more than a decade later, the issue at the center of the matter was public funding for stadium improvement or a new stadium altogether. And as would be the case with Modell in Cleveland, there was nothing but contempt for the perceived greed of the owner. For years, Irsay had been in the midst of a nasty public battle with the state of Maryland, and more recently, Baltimore's Mayor William Donald Schaefer and members of the state government had openly discussed the possibility of seizing the team by eminent domain. And so Irsay decided rather than give them the chance to do so, he would take his ball and go home. Baltimore at the time was in many ways a city in decline. Due to its location as the East Coast's furthest inland port, the city had been a major shipping and manufacturing hub for the entirety of the United States history to this point. In particular, the presence of major factories for companies like Bethlehem Steel, Black & Decker, and General Motors helped the city grow to nearly 1 million residents prior to the 1970s, and also helped grow a certain blue-collar ethos that these industries instilled in the population and helped project onto their sports teams as well. But that 1970s decade, rather than continuing on in a similar fashion, was instead marked by a massive exodus to the suburbs, by primarily white residents due in large part to safety concerns following the 1968 riots that were sparked by the assassination of MLK and led Governor and future disgraced former Vice President Spiro Agnew mobilize the National Guard in the city, along with federal troops from President Lyndon Johnson. In the aftermath, the population began a decline that has only continued, with the most recent population estimate sitting at 569,000. Nice. The city residents that remained weren't blind to this in 1984, and the loss of a football team that had represented to so many the working class nature of the city felt like a kind of final verdict on the worth or the value of the city itself. To be fair, this was a city that had just seen their Baltimore Orioles win a World Series 5 short months earlier, their third in 20 years. A young David Simon, still years away from depicting the city in shows like Homicide and The Wire, was a beat reporter at the time for the local Baltimore Sun and spoke with a number of fans and residents that, in the wake of this departure, remarked how much more this might have hurt them had the Orioles left instead of the kind of woeful at this point Colts. Like Cleveland and their Browns later on, there was a mix of emotions. There was anguish and anger, sure, but also some small amount of relief mixed in, that at least the matter was settled and next steps could be determined. One could be forgiven based on these statements and based on this attitude that maybe the city might just take this on the chin and move on. However, the effort that Mayor Schaefer and others immediately put into bringing a new team to town seemed to indicate that this was not the case. Though the NFL passed them over in favor of more expansion teams in the southern United States, Baltimore did manage to secure a pro team within the decade. It was just a Canadian football team. And to their credit, the Baltimore Stallions, as they would come to be known, were very, very good. In their 2 years of existence, they made the Grey Cup title game both times and won in 1995, becoming still to this day the only US-based team to ever do so. But while their support was vastly outperforming the other US expansion teams for the CFL, this was just as much about proving that there was an appetite for NFL football as it was about the Stallions themselves. And after 2 years, when Modell and the Ravens came to town, they would indeed supplant their CFL counterparts. During their time in the city, the Ravens had largely satisfied that hunger. They had won a title in just their 5th season, the first NFL championship for the city since that 1970 Colts team. But in the subsequent years, a number of the team's attempts to scale that mountain once again had come up short against a foe wearing a familiar horseshoe on their helmets. When the 2006 13-3 number 2 seed Ravens hosted Indianapolis in the divisional round of the playoffs, fans must have salivated at the thought of being able to vanquish their old foes as a first step towards their second championship. In many ways, this was the most important football game to be held in Baltimore since that 1970 AFC Championship game. The vaunted Baltimore defense held up its end of the bargain and kept Peyton Manning out of the end zone for the entire game after he led the league in passing touchdowns during the regular season. But, unfortunately, the Indianapolis defense did the same to Baltimore's Steve McNair. In the end, it came down to a battle of the kickers, and with just 2 field goals for the Ravens' Matt Stover compared to 5 for Indy's Adam Vinatieri, The result was a final score of 15-6 and a disappointed city of Baltimore. To add salt to the wound, Indianapolis went on to win their first ever Super Bowl, the first time that franchise had won a title since that same 1970 season while still in Baltimore. 3 years later, in Joe Flacco's second season with the team, the Ravens were again ready to face their predecessors, this time on the road in Indianapolis. And once again, Baltimore failed to score a single touchdown in the entire game. Manning had no such trouble in a 20-3 beatdown led by none other than rookie coach Jim Caldwell, who would join Manning in the franchise's trip to their second ever Super Bowl since that controversial move to the Midwest. They did at least lose, and hey, for Baltimore, third time's gotta be the charm, right? And I mean, going into it, looking at the past two attempts to beat Indy in the playoffs, there is at least one pretty clear suggestion as to how they can improve. It would probably be good to score a touchdown.
Indy starts with the ball on a wildly unseasonable January afternoon that registers at 49 degrees at kickoff. After a 15-yard rush to get things going, the visitors immediately stall out and bring on once and future dumbass Pat McAfee to punt it off. Baltimore then gets deep into Indianapolis territory, but Ray Rice coughs up a fumble forced by former teammate Corey Redding. This time, Indianapolis gets much further than just 15 yards, going all the way to the Baltimore 30 over a long 7 minutes as the Ravens faithful experience the familiar sinking feeling of seeing someone with that damn blue horseshoe on their helmet carve up their secondary. But importantly, just as Jim Caldwell is no longer on that sideline, Peyton Manning is no longer under center. The season from hell that they experienced during Manning's protracted recovery from his neck surgeries had left the organization with all kinds of questions about whether he would ever be able to get back to full strength. Just months ago, the man had been completely unable to throw a ball. It was a fair question to wonder whether he would be able to continue to start in the NFL, let alone perform at the MVP level to which the team had become accustomed. But there was a stroke of luck for them. The 2-14 record that they limped to ended up nabbing them the number one pick in the upcoming 2012 draft. Indy let Manning walk, and with the first overall pick that season, selected Stanford quarterback Andrew Luck. Luck was everything Indy fans could have dreamed of and more, which is saying something given that their last high draft pick quarterback was Peyton fucking Manning. Luck was only the fifth player to win Pac-10 Offensive Player of the Year twice, even if he technically won Pac-10 once and Pac-12 once. The two-time Heisman runner-up had also had an excellent mentor to prepare him for the rigors of being a pro quarterback during his college career. From 2008 to 2010, his coach was Ravens legend Jim Harbaugh. Much like John and his quarterback Flacco had revitalized the Ravens, Jim and Luck came into Stanford with the school having never won more than 10 games in a season, with only a single 10-win season since World War II. In Luck's final season, the pair would have set the program record with 11 wins, except that they had already set the record with 12 wins the year before.
This was enough to earn Jim Harbaugh a promotion to the NFL, and they made Luck the clear-cut pick, even with stars like actual Heisman winner RG3 also available. While Indy couldn't stop Houston from claiming another AFC South title this year, a 9-win improvement was plenty good enough to get them back to the playoffs, something even Peyton Manning couldn't manage during his own rookie season. Additionally, in his first season, he threw for 4,183 yards, a rookie record by over 100. His reward was a trip to a stadium where all of the history that he was but a small part of made him an object of anxiety and contempt. So you can imagine how thrilled the crowd is as at the end of this magnificent drive, Luck is manhandled by Paul Kruger, who strip sacks him to get the ball right back to Baltimore. The game continues as the two teams trade field goals to make it 3-3 when Flacco gets the ball just ahead of the 2-minute warning. After taking about half that time to reach midfield, a little dump off to Rice results in him breaking free and streaking down the field for 47 yards before finally being brought down to the 2-yard line. From there, it just takes a plunge from Vonta Leach for Baltimore to finally score a touchdown against Indianapolis in the playoffs after nearly 150 minutes of game time. With just 50 seconds remaining, Luck does manage to quickly get them into position for a field goal, and the first half ends with Baltimore up 10-6.
The head coach for Indianapolis is eminently familiar with these locker rooms that the teams are heading towards, or he was at least very familiar with the locker rooms on the other side of the field for quite some time, because as if these teams were already entirely too tangled up in every possible way, The man that was hired to replace Jim Caldwell as the new head coach this season had served on John Harbaugh's defensive staff for the entirety of Harbaugh's tenure prior to this season. Chuck Pagano had risen all the way up to defensive coordinator the previous year, but that playoff loss in New England was the last game he ever spent on the Ravens sideline before heading to his new gig as Indy's head coach this offseason. If you were looking for inspiring feel-good stories, Pagano's 2012 season is about as good as it gets. Not because he had a good time, mind you. From weeks 5 to 16, Pagano was receiving treatment for fucking leukemia. Offensive coordinator Bruce Arians ended up stepping in and steadying the ship and even won Coach of the Year for his efforts, but Pagano was eventually able to return just before Christmas and just in time to travel back to Baltimore to try and beat his former boss. As for the game on the field that was surrounding the soap opera, coming out of the half, both opening drives of the second half fall flat. Indy, after theirs, eventually punts the ball back to Baltimore, and now Flacco finally starts to cook, leading off with a 10-yard dart to Anquan Boldin to pick up an immediate first down, and 2 plays later hucking a 46-yard rainbow to Boldin once again, picking up another first down and a whole lot more this time, and setting them up for a Flacco to Dennis Pitta 20-yard touchdown, making the score Baltimore 17, Indianapolis 6. Andrew Luck's not done yet. 6 minutes later, he hits future Hall of Famer Reggie Wayne for 20 yards to set up 1st and 10 at the Baltimore 14. And even though they can't reach the end zone over the next 3 plays, they do still bag another Adam Vinatieri field goal to close the gap to 8 points. Now up by only a single score, Flacco on the next drive connects with Boldin deep yet again, picking up 21 yards this time, before handing the ball off to Ray Rice, who goes for 18 yards before losing his second fumble of the day.
Indy has life and leans hard on their Vic Ballard run game here to try and beat up on the middle of Baltimore's D. They bend, allowing the visitors to get all the way back to the 22, but they do not break, forcing a field goal attempt from there that is no good and gives Baltimore the ball back with a chance to try and ice this game if they get one more touchdown here in the fourth quarter. The first play is a pass to Torrey Smith, and then Baltimore turns to its ground game. But with Rice suffering from a case of butterfingers, rookie backup and Temple Owl Bernard Pierce gets his number called and shortly responds with a massive 43-yard gain that represents an astounding 20% of his career playoff rushing total and nearly 3% of his entire career total. That gets them inside the 20, and this time, when Joe puts the ball up in the end zone, his security blanket in the form of Anquan Boldin is there for him once again. Anquan Boldin. We've said his name a lot already in the series, but haven't had a moment to talk about him, and this score is as good a time as any, with him now well beyond the 100-yard mark in this game. Anquan Boldin, unlike most Ravens stars, was not drafted by them. He was instead drafted by the oldest franchise in the NFL, the Arizona Cardinals. As rookie in 2003, he made the Pro Bowl on the back of 1,377 receiving yards. As of the beginning of the 2024 season, that number would still be the franchise record for the Ravens if he had set it with them. Arizona was thrilled to have him to pair with one of their top draft picks the next year, Flacco's former fellow Pitt Panther, Larry Fitzgerald. But, unfortunately for Boldin, their first season together got off to a shaky start when he suffered a right knee injury in camp that held him out till their 7th game.
Once the two were healthy together on the field, though, it was football nirvana. Catching passes from a resurgent Kurt Warner at this point, the two racked up more than 13,000 receiving yards together from 2004 to 2009, an average of 1,100 per year each. In 2005, the two became just the third pair of teammates to ever both post 1,400-yard seasons in the same year, and just the second pair to both have 100 receptions. They, along with Warner, eventually led the 2008 Cardinals on a roller coaster ride to an eventual Super Bowl appearance that came up short against the Steelers that had beaten a rookie Joe Flacco to make it the big game. By the end of 2009, Arizona was staring down some financial realities about upcoming contracts. And so they looked at their tandem of receivers, judged Fitzgerald to be the smarter long-term investment, and shipped Boldin off to the Ravens for a pair of draft picks. Boldin immediately signed a 3-year extension with the Darker Birds and quickly became Flacco's favorite target. While the favorite target of Joe Flacco at this point in his career was unlikely to put up the kind of 1,000-yard seasons that he had previously, he led the team each of his first 3 seasons with them, getting all the way up to 921 this season to go with maybe the biggest stat in terms of what it meant to Flacco, 45 first downs. That too was a stat he had racked up more of than any other Baltimore player over the previous 3 seasons. Because sure, Boldin can go for a deep ball as well as anyone on the team. But when the pocket is collapsing around Joe, as it often was during this tumultuous time for the offensive line, he needed some quick yards just to keep the drive alive. He always knew, fuck it, Q's down there somewhere. Anquan Bolden might not have been a star wideout anymore, but he was as reliable as they come, and that was exactly what the Birds had needed on this day. The score was now 24-9, and that would end up being the final. To Andy's credit, they fought till the bitter end, but after 17 yards on the last drive from Bernard Pierce got them the first down they needed to kill the clock, Flacco was able to line up in victory formation 3 straight times at the end of the game for kneel downs. Largely, a pretty boring last 10 minutes of game time, until that very last play. It was an interesting offensive configuration. On its face, just a normal cluster of bodies surrounding the quarterback to prevent any shenanigans at the line of scrimmage. But including Flacco, there were only 10 bodies on the line of scrimmage. And then there was the 11th player on offense, lined way deep in the backfield. This was the first ever, and only, offensive snap in the career of Baltimore Ravens legend Ray Lewis.
You know, I talked to my team today, and I talked to them about life in general, and everything that starts has an end. It's just life, and for me, today, I told my team that this will be my last ride.
This both is and isn't how it was supposed to end. On one hand, this is exactly what Lewis preached to the team after that heartbreaking loss in New England last season, that it was only part of the journey, that he and they would be back the next year, even stronger for the adversity. But on the other hand, no one could have expected this after the triceps tear against Dallas just a couple months ago that was assumed at the time to be a season-ending injury. The conversation afterwards surrounding the team's beating heart was whether he would return for another year to close out his career the following season. There was virtually no consideration of this year in the slightest. But as the season continued, rumors started to circulate that his recovery following surgery was going far better than expected. By December 5th, he had returned to practice, and 2 weeks later there was even scuttlebutt that he might be activated in time for the Week 15 showdown with the Denver Broncos and his old nemesis Peyton Manning. He would end up missing that matchup, and remained on injured reserve the next week as the team clinched the division. But for Week 17, he was at least upgraded to inactive, and finally, this week, he is suited up for, as he put it, one last ride. In this game against Indianapolis, Lewis suiting up meant adding on a massive brace on his right arm that made him look like the Bionic Commando. But if it was slowing him down, it sure didn't show up in the stat sheet, where he registered 13 tackles to lead both teams in the Ravens' win. As the game was coming to a close, the bracket in the playoffs had already broken in such a way that Baltimore was guaranteed to be on the road for the remainder of the postseason. This was guaranteed one way or another to be Ray Lewis's final game in Baltimore. So for that final play, John Harbaugh sent the legend out to line up at fullback. And as the clock wound down, he performed one final rendition of his famous squirrel dance to the tune of Nelly's Hot in Here. The dance he had performed as the last player out of the tunnel during player intros for nearly the entirety of his Ravens career. The crowd stood cheering and refused to leave their seats following the end of the game. Children and adults alike were weeping at the sight of the only Raven that had been there since the beginning. The only Raven that had been there as long as they had. Much as another city legend, Cal Ripken Jr. had done years prior, following his record-breaking 2,131st consecutive game started, Lewis eventually gave the crowd what they wanted and slowly jogged a lap around the stadium to acknowledge the fans that had cheered for him his entire career, saying his farewell. But as the team headed to the locker room, it became time to move on from these emotions and on to the next week's challenge. While Ray missed out on that December 16th tilt against Manning and the Broncos, he was about to get a second chance.
The Ravens had finally exorcised the blue and white demons of Baltimore's past, but there was a catch. They hadn't done it against the man who had been at the helm of that torture for the previous decade and a half. Unlike Indianapolis, Manning was still undefeated against the Birds after that December 16th bludgeoning in M&T Bank Stadium. And this time, The Ravens wouldn't get any kind of advantage from their friendly confines. If they didn't want their season to end, they would have to manage to continue it by winning on the road in Mile High Stadium. But after all, what has Joe Flacco ever done other than win playoff games on the road? Here he was, just 5 seasons in, already tied for the NFL record for road playoff wins. Not just for a player starting their career, or over a 5-year span, the most all-time, full stop. And while every game going forward was potentially the last ever for Ray Lewis, remember that Flacco turned down an extension ahead of the season. Every game from this point forward had a chance to be the last one he ever played in a Ravens uniform. So which January Joe was going to show up today? The game manager who could get the team in the win column, but almost exclusively on the back of his teammates, or the gunslinger that went toe-to-toe with Tom Brady a year prior in hope for a chance to do so again? The larger sports discourse world was of a pretty singular mind going into this game. Baltimore was going to lose. Maybe they would cover the massive 9.5-point spread. Maybe they would even keep it close and take it down to the wire. But in the end, they would lose. Of ESPN's 12 insiders, only Mike Golick selected the Ravens to win, and only out of fidelity to his preseason Super Bowl pick. After all, Manning had just come back from an entire season off, a season in which he underwent multiple surgeries that the franchise he'd played for his entire career and the football world at large thought he might never recover from, only to post the second highest passer rating, second highest yards per game, and third highest QBR to that point in his career on the road to winning Comeback Player of the Year. Between that, the Denver D fronted by Elvis Dumervil and Von Miller, nicknamed Doom and Gloom, and that pesky unblemished record against the Ravens, it seemed like a slam dunk pick.
Baltimore received the ball first, but was only able to move it to the 38 before Sam Cook came on to punt to Denver returner Trenton Holliday. Holliday had competed for return duties in Houston, the franchise that drafted him, with none other than Jacoby Jones. The former LSU track star had been cut from the Texans following a series of fumbled returns early in the season, but Denver brought him on in the hopes that his speed would help flip the field and give Manning even better field position. He had earlier this season scored the second longest play of the season with a 105-yard return touchdown, second only to Jacoby Jones. But after fielding the punt at the 10-yard line, he only needed 90 as he sprinted past the Baltimore special teams unit to open the scoring with the new longest punt return touchdown in playoff history. Now down 7-0, the pressure was on for Baltimore before Manning had even taken the field. And it got even worse when Holliday's counterpart, Jones, muffed a punt at the 6-yard line, falling on it to maintain possession. But after a lucky DPI call on 3rd and 8 that extended the drive beyond the potential 3-and-out, Flacco wound up that big old arm and uncorked a 59-yard pass to Torrey Smith, who burned future Hall of Famer Champ Bailey to even it up at 7. With the score already 7-7 less than 5 minutes in, Manning finally took the field for the Broncos' first proper drive of the day. But after an incompletion to Demaryius Thomas, his first touchdown pass of the day was a pick six snagged by Ravens defensive back Corey Graham. All of a sudden, not only was Baltimore up 14-7, but was Joe Flacco about to hang with Peyton Manning? Manning and the Broncos got the ball back shortly thereafter, and this time marched down the field in 11 plays over 5 minutes and 47 seconds to knot the score at 14. After a series of punts, Manning again orchestrated the touchdown drive, this time traveling 86 yards to put Denver back on top 21-14, lowering the blood pressure of the risk-adverse sporting world that had expected a demolition of the Baltimore defense. And after yet another Ravens punt, their third straight drive of 40 yards or fewer, Denver seemed poised after a crucial 4th down conversion to put this game out of reach. Up 7 and set to receive the ball after half, they had 1st and 10 from the Baltimore 36 and all the momentum on their side.
1 2-yard rush and 2 incompletions later, Matt Prater lined up for a 52-yard field goal to try and make it a 10-point game. But someone from the Ravens line got a hand on it and the kick fell well short, giving Flacco great field position with 1:16 and 2 timeouts remaining. Flacco struck quick, even while under pressure, getting 26 yards down the field with a couple of receptions from Anquan Bolden and Dennis Pitta. Then, on 1st and 10 from the 32 with 43 seconds remaining, Flacco saw Torrey Smith alone on the sideline with, and I cannot stress this enough, future Hall of Famer Champ Bailey, and for the second time in the first half, connected with Smith for a deep touchdown to tie the game at 21-all going into the half. As the second half kicked off, Justin Tucker very literally kicked off to Trenton Holliday, who already had 144 return yards that day, including his 90-yard score. We'll make that 249. Holliday only had to break a single tackle as he took the kick all the way to the house to become the first ever player in postseason history with both a punt and kickoff return for a touchdown in the same game. Denver 28, Baltimore 21. The most notable thing either quarterback does for the rest of the third quarter is fumble, as each of them gives away the ball once on a strip sack. But while the Broncos had been unable to capitalize on their gift of a turnover, the Ravens ended up being much more opportunistic. Starting just 37 yards away from a potential tie game, Ray Rice did almost all the damage on a vintage 32-yard gain that set him up to plunge in for the score from the 1-yard line 2 plays later to tie it up once again. Both defenses then forced a 3-and-out before Manning, as he is wont to do, led a fourth quarter go-ahead drive that ended in a 17-yard Demaryius Thomas touchdown to take the lead back yet again, 35-28.
Once again, the pressure was on, and once again, Flacco was up to the challenge. He and Bolden had back-to-back completions of 19 and 17 yards to get across midfield. And as had been the case all day, he genuinely looked up to the challenge of topping one of the greatest players in league history. But then, tragedy. A terribly timed false start gave them a 1st and 15 that they simply could not overcome, forcing Flacco, after a pair of incompletions on 3rd and 4th down, to walk off the field, still down a score as Peyton Manning tried to ice the game. Except Manning would not do a damn thing on this drive. Instead, Denver was confident that running back Ronnie Hillman would get them the first downs they needed to run the clock and burn the final Baltimore timeouts. Denver was right about one thing. Baltimore did indeed burn all 3 timeouts. But after rushing for 13 yards in his first 2 attempts, Hillman only managed 3 in the next 3. And Denver punted the ball back to Baltimore, giving Flacco one last shot. With 1:09 on the clock and no timeouts left, everyone watching around the country knew that Flacco would be looking deep. And on 1st down, he did indeed throw one down there for Dennis Pitta, who was unable to corral it in. On 2nd and 10, Flacco ended up escaping the pocket as it collapsed to pick up 7 yards. But now the clock was ticking and they faced 3rd and 3 from their own 30-yard line. Baltimore needed a miracle. They got one.
Jacoby Jones had largely been a non-factor on special teams all day. But on the other side of the field, Trindon Holliday is the only reason that Peyton Manning was still even in this thing in the first place. Flacco hadn't had the luxury of any incredible returns making his life easier on this particular day. But Jones was still, ostensibly, a wide receiver. And with yet another pocket collapsing under the pressure of the Broncos defense, Flacco stepped up and threw a ball deep into the Denver night air. Watching this at home in Baltimore with my family, we had come to realize by this point in the game that our neighbors, whom we could hear through the next door walls, were about 5 seconds ahead of us on their broadcast. And so I don't know that I actually remember seeing the pass completed, because when we heard the noises that came from our neighbors as the ball sailed through the air still on our screen, but I didn't need to see the end to know that something magical had just happened.
Flacco stepping up and throwing deep down the far sideline. Caught! Into the end zone! Touchdown, Jacoby Jones! How does that happen in the Denver secondary? That is stunning.
Denver got the ball back with 31 seconds and 2 timeouts remaining. Would they give Manning a shot at his own deep ball magic? Would they try and pick up a couple quick chunks and take a shot at the game-winning field goal? No. With a man who could still at this point legitimately claim to perhaps be the greatest quarterback ever, the Denver Broncos decide to kneel. Baltimore took the ball first in overtime and quickly moved across midfield before a massive sack split by the doom and gloom duo forced the first of 3 punts in the extra period. Neither team could move the ball more than 29 yards until Denver's second chance, with the clock rapidly approaching the end of the first overtime period. In case Donovan McNabb is listening, games cannot result in a tie in the playoffs, and so, if required, there would be a second overtime. But that wasn't looking all that likely as Manning and Hillman began to get things going, quickly moving 30 yards in 2 minutes with the knowledge that all they needed to win now was a field goal in the thin Denver air. On 2nd and 6, Manning targeted former Raven Brandon Stokely for a short pickup. What he found instead, though, was Corey Graham waiting for him a second time.
Manning's second pick of the day, both to Graham, put Baltimore at the 45, and now it was their turn to simply run the ball with their bell cow Rice until they found themselves in field goal range. Finally, on 4th and 5, after a 4-hour and 11-minute long game, Justin Tucker booted it from 47 yards out through the uprights to complete the upset. Ravens 38, Broncos 35. Flacco 38, Manning 35. The passing line for 4-time MVP Peyton Manning on the day, 28 of 43 for 290 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. For the so-called game manager, January Joe, 18 of 34 for 331 yards, 3 touchdowns, and most importantly, 0 interceptions. The world had just watched Joe Flacco beat the next hot thing at quarterback playing for the team that abandoned Baltimore before torturing them for a decade. And then he went on to beat the old quarterback that did the torturing, all while becoming the winningest road quarterback in playoff history, and all while playing on a contract that would expire as soon as their season ended. It was the kind of storybook ending that a studio would reject as far too saccharine. And the only way it could get any more melodramatic at this point would be if somehow they managed to make it back to New England for an AFC Championship rematch just 1 year after the most gutting loss imaginable.
Well, about that. The wistful bygone era when Tom Brady only had 3 Super Bowl rings. A more civilized age. But even then, facing the New England Patriots at home in the playoffs was about the surest way possible to lose a playoff game. Entering this rematch, Belichick and the Pats had lost exactly 2 games at Foxborough during the Brady era, compared to 11 wins during that span, with both losses coming in just the last few years. The 33-14 embarrassment against the Ravens, in which the Birds had been up 24-0 after just 1 quarter and Flacco ended up only having to throw the ball 10 times. And then a similar embarrassment against the Jets the following season under Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez. Since then, New England had locked back down, and they seemed to be doing the same on a frigid Sunday night against the Ravens through the first 15 minutes. The Pats' first score was a Steven Gostkowski field goal to go up 3-0, and for a little bit that might have seemed enough, as the Baltimore offense was getting nowhere. Each of the first 3 Ravens drives failed to make it past their own 25-yard line, and it looked for all the world as if we were destined for a bitter defensive slugfest as Flacco and the Birds began their 4th drive in the waning seconds of the first quarter deep in their own territory. But maybe they just needed some time to warm up, or maybe they needed the heightened difficulty as motivation. Whatever it was, they were able to promptly march 90 yards down the field before Ray Rice plunged in for the go-ahead score to make it 7-3 after the extra point, taking the lead for the first time that evening. Tom Brady and Pats running back Stephen Ridley then worked a very similar drive in response, taking the lead back to make it 10-7, and with Rice still gassed on the next drive and Bernard Pierce unable to move the ball at all against New England, Baltimore was forced to punt yet again, which Brady, once again, was able to capitalize on as the Patriots finished the drive by taking the points with a chip shot field goal from 25 out to make it 13-7.
Both Flacco and Brady got some deep shots in their first drives of the second half. Flacco with the 26-yarder to Bolden, and Brady with a 24-yarder to Wes Welker, but both of the first drives ended with punts. Finally, after a day that had been split evenly for both teams between the ground and the air, Harbaugh finally decided to let Joe air it out on the next drive, and air it out he did. On 10 of the 11 plays for the subsequent drive, Joe Flacco passed with only 4 incompletions, one of which still drew a DPI flag that moved the ball 15 yards. Finally, a little short strike to Dennis Pitta put the Birds up 14-13. But surely, Tom Brady would be able to do what his counterpart Manning couldn't do, and deliver in the clutch against supposedly lesser competition. Not so. After seemingly picking up a first down early, offensive holding and an incompletion instead reverted it to a 3-and-out, giving Flacco the ball back at the Baltimore 37. This time, Rice and Pierce were able to chip in 26 on the ground, but Flacco again got to cap it off when he found Anquan Bolden in the end zone to make it 21-13. And now, the wheels began to fall off the well-oiled New England machine.
After Brady was able to lead the Pats to the 39, Stevan Ridley got knocked senseless by safety Bernard Pollard, who scooped up the ensuing fumble to set up the Ravens with their best field position of the day at the New England 47. And for the 3rd straight drive, they made the most of it. Flacco hit Torrey Smith and Jacoby Jones for a combined 22 yards, showed off his own wheels with the 14-yard scamper, and then hit Anquan Bolden yet again for his 3rd score in 3 weeks, putting Baltimore up 28-13. With New England now the ones in panic mode, Brady took the ball in his hands and got down to 2nd and 4 at the Baltimore 19 before 3 straight incompletions led to a turnover on downs. A quick 3-and-out gave him yet another shot, and he connected with Wes Welker for a huge 36-yard gain to scare the Ravens a little bit. But on the very next play, the Pats saw their 3rd straight drive end on a turnover when a pass intended for tight end Aaron Hernandez instead found itself in the hands of Baltimore's Donnell Ellerbe.
By the time Brady got the ball back, 2 minutes and 5 seconds remained, and New England had already burned all their timeouts. The outcome of this game was all but determined. But to cap off the 21-0 second half shutout, Baltimore's Kerry Williams was able to position himself perfectly and force a second Brady interception on the day with just over a minute to play. New England had just seen 4 straight drives end in a turnover, and 2 kneel downs later, that last one ended their season as well. The Ravens had actually done it. They had actually managed to, 1 year later, make it back to the exact site against the exact foe from their greatest heartbreak and avenge their loss in spectacularly dramatic fashion for their second ever Super Bowl appearance. There are so many storylines at this point that one could make this Ravens postseason run about. There was, of course, Ray Lewis, who had continued his torrid return from injury, not just leading the Ravens in tackles in all 3 games, not just by being the leading tackler for either team in all 3 games, but by leading all players in postseason tackles to this point for the season. There was also one of the league's youngest franchises managing to reach the Super Bowl twice now in less than 20 years of existence. And there was the only coach in the league to have previously been a special teams coordinator who nonetheless had the kind of intangible interpersonal skills needed to bring a team from their lowest lows back to the highest of highs in just 12 months. But with the 3-game stretch he had just posted, combined with the context of the contract that was still set to expire the second they lost a game, somehow Joe Flacco, that dullest of dull quarterbacks, had managed to make himself the biggest story.
In 3 games, the just turned 28 January Joe had just gone 51 of 93 for 853 yards, 8 touchdowns, and notably not a single interception. And on top of the performance itself, there was the matter of who exactly he'd beaten. The ghost of Baltimore football past, led by the anointed successor to Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, actual 4-time MVP Peyton Manning on the road, and the player generally accepted now to be the single greatest QB in league history, playing in the single most hostile playoff environment in football, with all the baggage that coming up short last year carried with it.
Or leave Luck out of it, and just look at the fact that Brady and Manning had represented the AFC in 7 of the last 10 Super Bowls since Baltimore's most recent appearance. For a player that commentators like Skip Bayless still called Joe Fluco, the proof was in the pudding. Joe Flacco had just conquered one of the most impressive 3-game quarterback matchup gauntlets ever, in the process becoming the winningest road quarterback ever. Flacco, who still had never even been selected to a Pro Bowl, let alone an All-Pro team, had risen to every challenge this January had to present to him. After a couple of weeks off, it would be time to see how he handled February.
Flacco at this point is no stranger to postseason records, and a new one was coming up on the horizon now. With his 8 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, he had gotten feasibly within reach of the record for the most touchdowns in any playoff run without throwing an interception. The record at this point was held by Joe Montana, who had tossed 11 without a pick in his 1989 postseason run that ended with a lopsided 55-10 Super Bowl win for his 49ers. And to add just another layer of beautiful dramatic irony to the story of this Ravens postseason run, that is the exact team that the Ravens would be facing in New Orleans for Super Bowl 47. After the gauntlet of foes that Flacco would face to this point, there might have been some relief that the Niners weren't led by some grizzled old vet like Brady or Manning. They also weren't led by a rookie, as Indianapolis had been by Luck, but it was the first year starting for their young quarterback, Colin Kaepernick. After spending a year on the bench as the backup for Alex Smith, Cap got his first shot at the first string when Smith suffered an unfortunate concussion in the middle of a Week 10 game against the Rams. While that game ended in a tie, Cap had plenty of success down the stretch starting the remaining 7 games for the Niners, and distinguished himself not necessarily as a passer, but more what he was able to do with his role in the ground game. Mike Vick was still in the league at this point with the Eagles, and his Falcons peak was still recent enough that it was in the memories of most football fans, so it's not like the league hadn't seen a dual-threat quarterback before. But what the league was still getting used to was the new scheme that was being used for quarterbacks like Cam Newton, RG3, and Colin Kaepernick, the pistol offense.
The name was a play off the popular shotgun offense, wherein the quarterback lines up about 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage with the running back right next to them, with the goal of providing the quarterback the best possible vantage point to read the defense, as well as affording offensive line and any additional blockers as much space and time as possible to protect the quarterback. The pistol combined elements of this with the single back offense, where the halfback is 5 yards behind the quarterback, who takes the snap from directly behind the center. The shotgun had the primary drawback of telegraphing that the offense would almost certainly be passing, whereas the single back allowed the offense to better disguise their intentions. With the pistol, the quarterback was not directly behind the center, lining up 4 yards behind the line with the running back 3 yards further back. This way, the offense can still possibly be running either a pass or rush on any given play, while still giving the QB an excellent vantage point in order to read what the defense is giving them. And when combined with the option offense, a QB who is skilled at making those reads would have options through the air or on the ground to select from, even more so if the quarterback was a rushing threat.
Chris Ault, coach at the University of Nevada, Reno, is credited as the primary progenitor of the offensive scheme in 2005. And the very next year, he found himself scouting a California area high school quarterback operating in that old standby, the wing T, that he thought could potentially fit his offense perfectly, Colin Kaepernick. Despite nearly switching his position his sophomore year to help him see the field more, an injury to the starter in college ended up jump-starting his career just as it would in the pros. Kaepernick's ability to throw and run with the ball saw him become just the 6th player to throw for 2,000 yards and rush for 1,000 in the same season, something he managed to do an unprecedented 3 times. He was also the second to have both 20 passing and rushing touchdowns in the same season, and the first and to date still only college player to pass for 10,000 yards and rush for 4,000 during their college career in FBS history. And when he made the jump to the pros, the pistol made the jump with him, as it was adopted by the San Francisco Offensive Brain Trust of coordinator Greg Roman and head coach Jim Harbaugh.
Oh, yeah, John Harbaugh is about to play his brother in the Super Bowl? After Jim Harbaugh coached Andrew Luck for 2 of his 3 seasons in Palo Alto with the Cardinal and capped his Stanford tenure with an Orange Bowl win, he was offered a 5-year, $25 million deal to take a job just a short drive away with the San Francisco 49ers. This came during a dour period for the franchise, as they hadn't had a playoff appearance or even a winning record since 2002, and the hope was that he would be able to spark the same kind of turnaround he had done with the previously moribund Stanford program. Unsurprisingly, this hire made the Harbaughs the first pair of brothers to ever coach in the NFL during the same season. They even faced off against one another on Thanksgiving 2011, with the Ravens winning 16-6 in what became known colloquially as the Harbaugh, at least for a little bit, until all of a sudden, the possibility of a much more super Harbaugh presented itself. While John of the Ravens a year ago had been busy watching Billy Cundiff's kick sail wide of the goalposts, Jim and his squad had been gearing up for an NFC Championship game in his very first season as head coach. Much like George Lucas said of his prequel trilogy compared to his original Star Wars films, the 2 Harbaugh stories weren't the same, but like poetry, they rhymed.
If Eli Manning and the New York Football Giants won the Super Bowl last year, one can surmise that their Super Bowl berth came at the expense of San Francisco, thereby dashing the romantic idea of brothers facing off against one another with a championship on the line. But despite a small drop-off from 13-3 to 11-4-1, upgrading from incumbent Alex Smith to Kaepernick was exactly what Harbaugh's squad needed to take the next step in the playoffs. Cap, already lighting the league on fire down the home stretch of the regular season, decided to write his name in the record books in his very first postseason start. He accounted for 444 total yards of offense, including 181 yards rushing, setting the record for any quarterback in any NFL game ever in just his 8th career start. The Niners won that game against the Green Bay Packers, led by yet another elite signal caller in 2011's MVP Aaron Rodgers, setting up an NFC Championship against Flacco's old foil Matt Ryan and his own birds in Atlanta. Hey, look at that. Matt Ryan finally won a playoff game in his 5th season. That's cute. Unfortunately for him, that win was immediately followed by a game in which he and the Falcons went up 17-0, only to blow both that and a 24-14 lead in what will surely be the worst collapse for the franchise on a stage like this in the playoffs for years to come, if not ever.
But rather than thinking of that as a Falcons collapse, let's focus instead on the Niners' defense shutting out one of the league's best offenses, while Colin Kaepernick manages a second-half comeback to lead his team to the Super Bowl in just his first year as a starter. Even Flacco wasn't able to manage that, nor was Baltimore's Harbaugh able to manage consecutive conference championship games like his brother. But here were Jim and his Niners in the Super Bowl in just his second year with the team. For a story like this, Brady or Manning could have been the final boss, sure. But somehow, some way, the universe worked its magic to find an even more absurdly poetic obstacle to stand in the way of Flacco's chance at reaching the mountaintop and finally establishing himself as one of the premier quarterbacks of his generation. Only one game remained, and would kick off at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome on February 3rd, 2013.
Super Bowl 47. Brother against brother. East Coast versus West Coast. One of the league's oldest and most decorated franchises against one of its youngest. A coming out party for one side and a potential retirement party for the other. And above all, a chance for Joe Flacco to prove to the world what he and the Ravens and all of Baltimore already know. Here at the beginning, though, he's going to have to wait for at least one drive, as the Ravens win the toss and defer, giving San Francisco the ball to begin the game. The Niners nearly get off to an excellent start with Kaepernick hitting veteran tight end Vernon Davis for 20 yards on the first play from scrimmage. But Davis gets flagged for illegal formation of all things, and the drive ends up netting only -2 yards before they punt it off to the Ravens. Flacco took the ball at the Baltimore 49 after a nice little return from Jacoby Jones, playing in his native New Orleans, and the offense got right to work. After 12 yards between a pass to fullback Vontae Leach and a Ray Rice rush, Flacco threw his first deep ball of the day to Torrey Smith for another 20 to enter the San Francisco red zone. They nearly had to settle for a Justin Tucker field goal 3 plays later, but another penalty, this time defensive offsides on the San Francisco 49ers, gave them a second chance on third down, and Flacco didn't waste it, throwing his 9th touchdown of the playoffs on the next play to Anquan Boldin as the Ravens jumped to an early 7-0 lead.
Kaepernick was ready to answer in the ways that only he could, though, on the very next drive. A 19-yard completion to wideout Michael Crabtree and a trio of Frank Gore rushing attempts got them to midfield before Cap decided to show off his own legs, picking up gains of 9 and 7 yards on consecutive attempts. After another solid Gore pickup, Kaepernick linked up with Vernon Davis for a deep 24-yard shot that this time was free of any flags. The Niners had first and goal at the 8-yard line and were poised to tie the game up, but after no gain in the first 2 plays, Baltimore's Paul Kruger blew up the offensive line and sacked Kaepernick for a loss of 10 yards, forcing them to settle for a David Akers field goal to cut the deficit to 4. On the following Akers kickoff, Jacoby Jones again got a nice little return to get Baltimore out to the 22 for Flacco in the offense. They managed to again get across midfield, this time on a beautiful 30-yard pass to who else but Anquan Boldin, but they went from 1st and 10 at the 34 to 4th and 18 at the 42, after 2 tackles for a loss against Vontae Leach and Flacco, forcing a Baltimore punt to start the second quarter. Cap continued to go to the Vernon Davis well, with his first 2 passes going for 29 and 11 yards to quickly get into the Ravens' half of the field, but 3 plays later came tragedy for the Niners. Backup running back Michael James, spelling Gore for a snap just moments after a solid 9-yard gain, got taken down behind the line of scrimmage and fumbled the ball just outside of the Baltimore red zone.
As if to add salt to the wound, Baltimore's backup running back Bernard Pierce immediately picked up 12 yards on his next 3 rushes before Flacco decided that he too could feed his tight ends. First, a 9-yard pass to Dennis Pitta. Then, completions of 23 and 14 yards to Ed Dixon, sandwiching a Ray Rice 7-yard rush to get them to the San Francisco 4. And then, to cap it off, in an appropriately tight end fashion, a 1-yard touchdown pass 2 plays later to Dennis Pitta to go up 14-3 with 7:15 remaining in the half. After the kickoff, Kaepernick on the next play looked for a veteran that had helped Tom Brady become capital T, capital B Tom Brady back in 2007, Randy Moss. But when he took a deep shot in Moss's direction, there was a different veteran there, Baltimore's Ed Reed.
Much like Jacoby Jones, Ed Reed is more or less playing a home game today, having grown up less than 20 miles away in St. Rose, Louisiana. Reed, like teammate Ray Lewis, came to the Ravens as a first-round draft pick from the turn-of-the-millennium Miami Hurricane defense, entering the league in 2002. In the first 2 years that Reed and Lewis spent fully healthy together on the Ravens, they won consecutive Defensive Player of the Year awards between the two of them in 2003 and 2004. Like Lewis, Reed quickly became quite simply the best at his position in the 21st century, if not all time. Maybe you think the top spot should be Troy Polamalu, maybe you think it's Brian Dawkins, and maybe you're wrong, and that's okay. The fact is that the two Miami alumni formed a nearly unprecedented pairing of all-time greats in Baltimore, making the middle of the field anywhere beyond the line of scrimmage absolute hell for opposing offenses for a decade together. Now, they had their differences. Whereas Ray Lewis was dancing and screaming and shouting, Reed had always been a more taciturn and reserved player, playing into his reputation as a cerebral ball hawk who saw the field more clearly than perhaps anyone before or after him ever could or will. But that wasn't the only difference between the two. Ray, after all, had a ring for all their years together that he had won prior to his teammate's arrival, and to this point, Reed still did not. At the risk of beating a dead horse, there were so many storylines in the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. Joe Flacco's pursuit of Joe Montana, the sibling rivalry of the Harbaughs, Ray Lewis's miraculous recovery, which has now had a slight shadow cast on it by a January 28th report by Sports Illustrated that introduced us all to the phrase deer antler spray. But to add just one more potential storybook ending, you also had the idea of Ed Reed, future first ballot Hall of Famer and greatest ball hawk of all time, getting to finally win a Super Bowl just minutes from where he was born. Reed definitely felt pretty good about it himself.
Yes, sir, Baltimore. We got 2 tickets to paradise. Whoa, 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 whoa.
The pass intended for Moss found Reed instead, and Baltimore got its second turnover of the game. Now with incredible field position, already inside of Tucker's field goal range, the team indeed looked like they would settle for a Tucker field goal when the kicking unit came out a couple minutes later, facing 4th and 9 at the Niners' 14. But John Harbaugh wasn't about to leave any of his special teams tricks unused, and Tucker took the snap himself, rushing to the left end and nearly converting the first down before falling just a yard short. No matter, a quick 3-and-out and the Ravens had the ball right back just ahead of the 2-minute warning. Jacoby Jones nearly gave the team a heart attack with a muffed punt, but after recovering it, still managed to return it for another 11 yards. Perhaps as a reward, Joe targeted him deep on the first play of the drive. No good. Looking to go deep again, Flacco wound up and aimed for Torrey Smith on 2nd down. Once again, no good. But after all, third time's the charm. On a 3rd and 10, Flacco stepped up in the pocket and launched a missile 50 yards downfield where Jacoby Jones caught it as he hit the ground. But without being touched by a defender, Jones had the wherewithal to get back up and scamper the last few yards into the end zone. And the record-tying playoff touchdown number 11 for Joe Flacco ends up being a 56-yard score by Jacoby to put the Ravens up 21-3.
This did have the unfortunate consequence of leaving a lot of time on the clock for Kaepernick and the Niners, and they capitalized on it after a couple big passes quickly got them within field goal range. As the clock expired in the half, Akers hit his second field goal of the night. As the teams left the field in order to make way for the Beyoncé halftime show, the Ravens led 21-6. After an absolute banger from Queen Bee, Akers began the second half just as he had ended the first, with a kick. Not a field goal, mind you, but a kickoff, and a good one at that, nearly going out of the back of the end zone when Jacoby Jones caught it 8 yards deep. It probably wasn't a good idea in principle for him to decide to return this ball, but 108 yards later, no one was complaining about the process when the result was not just Jones' second touchdown of the day, not just his third kick return touchdown of the season, not just the new longest playoff kick return in history, beating out Trinidad Holidays, but a record-tying longest play in Super Bowl history to put the Ravens up 28-6 just seconds into the second half. This was quickly turning into a rout on the Ravens' part. There was still plenty of game left to be sure, but Baltimore had to be feeling amazing with just a half hour between them and their second ever Lombardi trophy. And then 3 plays into the next San Francisco drive, the fucking power went out in the Superdome.
Nowadays, years removed, we can pore through all kinds of documents that list the concerns that entities like Energy New Orleans or the Louisiana Stadium and Exposition District had about the power supply going into the game. We can see the line items of improvements commissioned by utilities like Entergy or All-Star Electric. We can read that the game drew no more power than a usual New Orleans Saints game would on any given Sunday. These things can all work to provide an explanation about the blackout, sure. But it will never make it any less unprecedented, any less incomprehensible that for 34 minutes, the single biggest annual sporting event in the world was delayed because of a 22-minute power outage. We can explain it, but we can't make it make sense. Online, conspiracy theories abounded then and still do to this day. Ray Lewis has gone on record expressing his incredulity that a, quote, zillion-dollar company would let the lights go out, indicating that he believed the league was unhappy with the game getting out of hand in Baltimore's favor. If any Ravens fans had felt a sense of narrative catharsis after that return touchdown to kick off the second half, a once-in-a-lifetime freak accident like this was exactly the kind of thing to allow a feeling of doom to start to creep in. And that doom wasn't the only thing creeping in, as this delay seemingly provided a cracked door that the Niners tried to force open in order to get back into this game.
Granted, they didn't do it on that possession. After having gotten to their own 40 prior to the blackout, when play resumed 34 minutes later, a 6-yard pass from Kaepernick to Delaney Walker on 3rd and 13 was insufficient to extend the drive. The Niners punted the ball back, and the next play saw Flacco connect with Torrey Smith for another 15-yard gain. Maybe all that worrying was for nothing. But then, the momentum started to swing. The next 3 plays picked up only 9 yards, and Baltimore punted the ball right back to San Fran. In 2 plays, Kaepernick again displayed the danger he posed as a runner with gains of 5 and 15 yards on consecutive rushes. And after Frank Gore spelled him for a play, Cap took to the air with a 9-yard pass to Randy Moss, an 18-yarder to Vernon Davis, and then a deep ball to Michael Crabtree that he took even deeper, breaking tackles from Kerry Williams and Bernard Pollard as he took it 31 yards to the house for the first Niners touchdown of the game to make it 28-13. Baltimore started their next drive at their own 17 and finished it at their own 8 after Flacco was sacked on 3rd and 10, and Sam Cook's relatively short punt was taken 32 yards by Ted Ginn Jr. to give the Niners incredible field position at the edge of the red zone. 2 plays later, Frank Gore plunged in for the second touchdown of the quarter to make it a 28-20 game.
On the next drive, Baltimore turned to Ray Rice on 1st down to try and start eating up the clock as the game got closer. And after a 3-yard gain, Flacco looked to Rice again for a dump-off on the left side. But San Francisco's Terrell Brown leveled him with a massive hit that knocked the ball loose before Brown himself recovered it. The Niners only moved the ball another 3 yards, but that was still worth 3 points, as Akers knocked home the field goal to make the score 28-23. In 9 minutes of game time, the margin of the game had gone from 22 points to just 5. With pressure mounting, the Birds went to Bernard Pierce on the ground instead this time to pick up 7 on 2 rushes before Anquan Bolden bailed Flacco out on 3rd down, taking a little screen 30 yards to flip the field. The ground game continued to slowly but steadily march down the field and chew up precious time as the game entered the 4th quarter. But after making it all the way to the San Fran 5-yard line for 1st and goal, Flacco and the Ravens were unable to find the end zone and had to settle for Tucker's first field goal of the day to make it 31-23 and push the lead back to 8 points.
That didn't last for long, though. Frank Gore was now, appropriately, goring the Ravens' defense like a raging bull, getting 26 yards on 2 carries on either side of a Kaepernick deep ball to Randy Moss covered by Ed Reed, with the wideout getting the best of his fellow wily vet this time for 32 yards. Once they got to the red zone, Kaepernick burned the Birds on the ground yet again for 18 yards on 2 carries to score their 3rd touchdown since the blackout. The Niners went for 2, with Kaepernick again looking for Moss, but the pass fell incomplete, leaving the score at 31-29 with just under 10 minutes remaining. Prior to this game, 10 points was the largest deficit any team had ever overcome in the big game, but what had looked like a blowout just an hour ago had suddenly become a nail-biter. All of that could be forgotten if Flacco could just get that record-breaking 12th playoff touchdown and provide the squad just a smidgen of breathing room. But Baltimore still wanted to run the ball to control the time of possession, with Flacco only throwing on 6 of the next 11 plays as Harbaugh and Caldwell continued to call the game as if they were up by 22 instead of just 2. Ray Rice had one 12-yard gain from around San Francisco's side of midfield, but every other rush was for 2 or fewer yards. Even a defensive offsides call that gave Joe a second shot after a 3rd and 7 incompletion wasn't enough for the Ravens to find the end zone, and they ended up settling for another Tucker field goal to make it 34-29.
San Francisco took the touchback on the ensuing kickoff and prepared to drive from the 20 with a chance to finally take the lead if they could just score a touchdown, something they had now done on 3 of their past 4 drives, with the only exception still netting them points as it ended in a David Akers field goal. To say that the Ravens were on the ropes would be an understatement, and the hits just kept coming. First it was on the ground, as Gore and Kaepernick each picked up 8 yards with their feet, before Cap uncorked another deep ball to Michael Crabtree for 24 yards to get them to Baltimore's side of the field, moving them within 40 yards of a go-ahead score. The Baltimore defense, the thing this franchise had hung its hat on for its entire existence, was gassed. And on the very next play, Frank Gore once again took advantage of that for a massive 33-yard gain to move the Niners all the way to the 7-yard line, where they now face first and goal. There would be no field goal attempt this time on fourth down. San Francisco was going to settle for nothing short of 6, and they would use every play to do it. Backup LaMichael James gave Frank Gore a breather on first down, taking the handoff 2 yards to make it second and goal from the 5-yard line. And on second, Kaepernick looks right to Crabtree yet again at the 1, but the pass is swatted away by Corey Graham. Crabtree cries out for a flag, but the officials keep it in their pocket for now.
Before third down, the CBS cameras cut to Flacco on the sideline, looking off towards the far end zone. The author of one of the greatest postseason runs by any quarterback in league history has temporarily been rendered helpless to do anything but watch, as his team tried desperately to cling to what remains of the 22-point lead he had spotted them before watching it dwindle over nearly 20 minutes of game time and almost 2 hours of real human time. But as Raven fans have come to expect over the past 5 years, the stoic Flacco betrays no emotion whatsoever on his face. Joe, as ever, remains chill. The third down snap comes seconds after expiration of the play clock, but Niners coach Jim Harbaugh manages to narrowly beat it with the timeout, their second of the half. We see Joe again looking on, nonplussed. Back to the action as the Niners again line up on the pistol with 3 wide receivers at the line and Crabtree lined up as the back before going into motion and heading to nearly the same spot as he had been a play ago. Kaepernick goes right back to him, and for a split second, Crabtree has it. But cornerbacks Jimmy Smith and Corey Graham are able to jar it loose with a big hit to bring up fourth down.
Kaepernick lines up in the pistol one last time with Gore behind him. Ray Lewis crashes the line of scrimmage on the snap, and it's all Kaepernick can do to get rid of it with a heave to the right corner of the end zone, where for a third straight play, Crabtree is supposed to have gotten open. But contact with Jimmy Smith as the two took off from the line of scrimmage slowed him up just enough to make it so that he can only watch as the ball falls harmlessly to the ground in front of him. Jim Harbaugh howls from the sideline for a holding call on Smith, but the referees merely signal turnover on downs, Ravens ball. It's still not over though, as the Ravens are in dangerous territory with just 5 yards between them and a potential safety if the Niners can get behind the line of scrimmage. This time, it's much more justified when John Harbaugh takes the ball out of Flacco's hands. The three-headed rushing attack of Rice, Pierce, and Vontae Leach each take one carry in order to burn the Niners' final timeout, in addition to all but 12 seconds of the clock. Following another Baltimore timeout, Sam Cook comes back for one last punt to try and put this out of reach, or so most of us thought.
Still to this day, no other person but John Harbaugh has gone from special teams coordinator to head coach of an NFL team. If we were going to try and offer an explanation as to why we might think that is, we could point to the fact that a special teams coordinator can't exactly bring some new revolutionary scheme or playbook with them when they're starting the gig. But in this moment, on the biggest stage of his life, John Harbaugh has a chance to show off exactly what a crafty special teams coordinator can manage. Sam Cook stands alone in the end zone, ready to receive the ball. Long snapper Morgan Cox snaps it, and Cook holds it. And he holds it. And he holds it. The pressure is coming, but Cook is not punting. He's not even trying to. Instead, he's scrambling around for 8 incredibly long seconds before finally stepping out of bounds for an intentional safety. The brilliance of this was that no matter what, the Birds were going to have to punt. Now not only will they get to do it from 12 yards further forward, but they'll get to do it with only 4 seconds remaining on the clock. There'll be no more time after this return for a Hail Mary attempt. This punt will be the last play of Super Bowl 47. Between discussions of the last play, Sam Cook lining up to punt, Ted Ginn Jr. lining up deep to receive for San Francisco, and a final Baltimore timeout being used, the cameras catch Joe Flacco pacing the sidelines one last time. Once again, he's relatively helpless, and for maybe the first time ever, a hint of emotion starts to show on his face. He looks, in a word, anxious. For so much of this second half collapse, he has been in this exact spot, unable to do anything but watch as the team fails to stop the bleeding. Now, in the very waning moments, as they prepare for the last play, he turns to Dennis Pitta, and he says the most out-of-pocket thing he's ever been caught saying.
If he starts to break it, go tackle him. Really? I don't know. I mean, what can they, I don't know. I mean, they might be able to give him a touchdown on that, but I don't know. Hey, if he breaks it, If he busts this for some reason, tackle him. Go tackle him. I don't know what the rule is on that, but why can't you? I will. I'm going to.
Pitta is incredulous, and Flacco insists he's serious. Doesn't know what the harm could possibly be. He doesn't even know the rule. Pitta won't entertain the idea, so he turns to center Matt Burke. He turns to tackle Michael Orr. He turns to anybody that will listen to him in this moment of temporary insanity because, for the record, there's absolutely a rule against this. Rule 12, Section 3, Article 3, to be specific. Of all times for the most level-headed player in the NFL to come up with an absolutely cockamamie scheme, this might just take the cake. Our attention turns away for a moment back to the field as the play finally gets underway. It's a free kick. There is no snap. Cook merely punts it off. Ginn makes the catch at 18, and the return begins. He starts breaking tackles. First James Ahigdebo, then David Reed, then Jimmy Smith. Each whiff tackle, each miss, bringing us closer to the possibility of Joe Flacco, now visible just at the rightmost edge of the shot, jumping onto the field himself. Ginn makes it an impressive 32 yards to get just across midfield, but he finally runs into a tackle he cannot break. Josh Bynes brings him down, the Ravens storm the field, and the confetti falls. There are plenty of scenes to pick from in the immediate aftermath of the win, plenty of images that'll last for years after this. The Harbaugh brothers seeking one another out for the post-game handshake, Shockey Brown making snow angels in the confetti, Ray Lewis cradling Michael Phelps' head on the sideline, native son Ed Reed standing on the podium, holding the first and only trophy of his pro career in his hometown. But if we had to pick just one, remember that scene from Tampa 12 years ago? Well, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Let's check in with Joe.
Joe Flacco, you and the Baltimore Ravens just won the Super Bowl. What are you going to do next?
I'm going to Disney World! Dreams come true.
Elite is a production of Remember That Guy. Written, researched, and recorded by James Lentzweiler, Justin Diaz, and Xavier Perez. All music is provided by RTG's musical director Don Ham, and sources for additional audio and all of our research can be found in the episode descriptions. More information on Elite and all things RTG related can be found at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing it. Word of mouth is our best, and only, sponsor. Until next time, thanks for listening.